Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5Dimes and hosted on MMAOddsBreaker.com. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 57 event, which takes place in Austin, Texas. Now, if you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 5 total bouts. Now, also pay special attention to our MMA Oddsbreaker staff picks article, because if we have any last minute changes to our picks, they will be posted there. So that'll be the official picks. Now, briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC 180 went 0-1 to lose 4.025 units. We also lost our 1.5 unit free play on Jake Ellenberger. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 57 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1 this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass, we have a featherweight contest between Juan Manuel Puig, who is 11-3, taking on UFC newcomer Doo Ho Choy, who is 11-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Choy minus 350 to come back on Puig plus 250. Looking over the lines at 5Dimes, it's now minus 365 for Choy. The comeback on Puig is plus 275. By the way, all lines that I quote today are courtesy of our sponsor, 5dimes.eu, so check those guys out. But getting back to the action, I do think that it's not a real big surprise that the movement on Choy a little bit is coming in here from the betting public overall, because I do think he's a very hyped prospect, highly anticipated UFC debut. He was actually supposed to make his debut back at UFC 173 against Sam Cecilia, so he got a little bit injured in that fight, or before the fight, obviously, so it got postponed. His debut got postponed till now. But again, highly anticipated prospect. He's a really good striker, and he's legit. So not surprised that the hype has carried the line a little bit more. But as far as breakdown goes for the fight, it should be interesting. I mean, again, Choy is a very talented fighter. His boxing's legit, has a ton of power. He's very accurate. And he has a solid kicking game to go along with that boxing. His takedown defense seems to be very solid overall as well. He has really good balance if you watch footage on the guy. I mean, when wrestlers or guys that try to take him down attempt the takedowns, more times than not, he just somehow manages to stay upright. And that's exactly what he needs to do, because he does some serious damage when he is upright. Now, strike defense is a little bit questionable at times. Choy does get hit, but he has shown a pretty solid chin. Now, you don't want to see a guy just eat punches, but that's what Choy does tend to do. It could get dangerous at times for sure, but I mean, overall, he's still young enough. He's 25 years old that I think hopefully he gets a little bit tighter with his defense, but man, the sky's the limit for this guy for sure. He's definitely a threat on the feet to most at 145. Now, heading over to Puig. Puig is more of a grappling-based fighter, of course, but he does have a complete MMA game. He's pretty solid, maybe a little bit slightly underrated compared to most people out there. I know he's coming off of that devastating KO loss, so that's going to be fresh in the minds of people as well. But as far as stylistically goes, I mean, Puig has some chances in this fight. I mean, he does like to push forward on the feet. He basically uses his striking, though, to set up his takedowns, but he does have a little bit of power. And he's aggressive overall, solid ground for sure. I mean, that's what he does best. His best attribute, of course, is on the ground. So he likes to shoot in for takedowns, get top control, land some ground and pound, and try to work his submission game. So that's his avenue to win this fight. He's going to have to basically close the gap, get inside on Choy, and try to take him down. And once he's on the ground, he definitely has a chance to win this fight. He can control, he can land some damaging blows for sure, or even look for the sub. But I think he's going to have a difficult time against Choy. I mean, stylistically, Puig has been obviously knocked out before. Choy hits really hard, and he's very accurate, like I said before as well. And his takedown defense should be good enough to end up keeping this fight upright. So for Puig, I don't think it's a good stylistic matchup. And I'm going to have to lean with Choy. I agree with the early action. It hasn't been nothing serious. It's just a little increase of the line, but I do think it's the right side. So I'm going to pick Choy to win this fight.
And I completely understand all the hype behind Choy, but there are a couple things that are a little scary for me. Obviously, the first one is he hasn't fought in well over a year, and, he's been announced as signed to the UFC, I believe, in November 2013. So it's been a long time since he's actually competed. The other thing that does scare me is in his last fight before actually signing with the UFC, while he did end up scoring a knockout, it was a second round knockout, I believe, in the first round, he took quite a bit of damage from his opponent, got hurt several times, so he is a little bit hittable. Now, speaking of hittable, Juan Manuel Puig is very hittable. In his UFC debut, obviously he was fighting an overmatched opponent in Adriano Martins, a guy that was just significantly better than him just about everywhere, and he basically walked into some big strikes. He was too aggressive, let himself open to counters, and just kept eating shots until he got put away. So against Duho Choy, if he does the exact same thing, he could definitely get finished here again. He is dropping down a weight class from 155 to 145, and he's going to be about the same size as Choy. So if he actually implements his wrestling-centric approach, he could potentially win this fight. But again, I do think Choy has a pretty good sprawl. His takedown defense is not bad whatsoever, and it'll probably only improve once he's able to back into a fence and sprawl out there as well. So it's not going to be an easy fight for Puig. Puig probably should be implementing his kicks, especially the low kicks, maybe to slow Choy down. But the biggest thing Choy has going for him is he's very aggressive. He loves to move forward. He has absolutely vicious knees that he can time very well. So he could, if Puig shoots in for a takedown, he could be eating a knee sandwich and be put to sleep right away. So that is a possibility. And Choy has some big power in both hands as well. So there's a reason that people are hyped up for this guy. He's probably the best prospect out of Korea right now. And I can definitely see Choy having an impressive UFC debut. But don't completely sleep on Puig. I think that he has a little bit more talent than people are giving him credit for. But this is Choy's fight to lose as long as he keeps it upright. So my pick is going to be Choy. Now dropping down to the women's strawweight division, we have a pair of UFC debuts in Paige VanZant, who is 3-1, taking on Kailin Curran, who is 3-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened VanZant minus 140 to come back on Curran, even money. And since that time, there's been more action coming in on VanZant. She's now up to minus 150. Actually, it got up a little bit higher and it's dropped back down. So back down to 150. So two-way support coming in, but with still a little bit more support on VanZant overall. This is a tough fight because, skill set for skill set, both these girls are talented for sure. There's probably a little bit more hype on VanZant coming into this fight than not. She's fought the better overall competition for sure. She had a competitive bout with Tecia Torres, and we all know how Ticia's doing on The Ultimate Fighter. She's just very well respected out there as well. But I have some question marks about VanZant, and one of them is she just had a spinal injury not too long ago. She was getting therapy for that, so that's a red flag in my opinion a little bit, how well she's recovered in this short span. She should be okay, obviously. She wouldn't be in this position and fighting on this card if she wasn't fully recovered, I would hope. So that shouldn't be much of an issue, but still in the back of my mind, it's a little bit uncomforting. Now, as far as skill set goes, VanZant is a very well-rounded fighter, more of a grappling-based fighter though. Her stand-up game is okay, but it definitely can use some improvement. Now, she's very aggressive, likes to fight in a clinch and look for takedowns. That's basically her game plan. So she'll clinch you up against the cage, hold you there, try to dirty box a little bit, land some knees, throw some blows that way and try to be effective. And she usually is. But at the same time, her takedown game is pretty nice. She has good throws and, she can basically do what she wants with people. Once she's on the ground, she gets top control. She can, land some good ground and pound. She has a decent submission game to go along with it. So she's very, very skilled on the ground, and she's a very solid prospect for sure at 115. But on the other hand, Curran a little bit less known, I should say. And she's originally from Hawaii. Now she's training out of California, Rain MMA. So she's training with a good camp in her own right. She's pretty impressive. I was actually more impressed watching film on Curran than I was VanZant. I think Curran on the feet, she has a wrestling base, but at the same time, she's more of a kickboxing stylist. So on the feet, she's fun to watch. She's very fast, technical, aggressive, nice overall kickboxing game. And also, as far as clinch work goes, I mean, she doesn't have that, I guess, dominant clinch game as far as controlling that VanZant does, but she does attack well from the clinch. She has good knees, and just good attacks, period, overall. I mean, she knows what to, and how to land shots when she's in tight as well. So I think she's going to want to keep this fight upright, obviously, and do what she does best, which is actually control the pace of the fight with her striking, kind of stuff takedowns, and try to outpoint VanZant or try to knock her out and finish her. So I think that's what Curran's going to look to do, and I think VanZant's going to look to clinch up, get this fight to the floor. And it's going to be a back and forth kind of battle. It's going to be a very close fight, I think, and if it hits the scorecards, it should be very interesting, which I do think more times than not it probably will hit the scorecards. So I'm sure we're going to see a very competitive decision with maybe some controversial judging along the way. But that being said, I'm going to pick the dog. I think that Curran is a little bit more impressive again in my mind. I think that if she could keep the fight upright, even if she is getting clinched up against the fence, I think she could turn out and get in better position and actually land more damaging blows on VanZant. So I got to go with the better overall fighter from what I saw on tape. I think it's going to be Curran, but I am expecting a competitive fight that realistically could go either way. But we could be looking at a dog or pass situation, and my official pick is going to be Curran.
Now I'm going to disagree here. I do think that Curran is a solid prospect, and she could win this fight. Both girls have a clear path to victory. Curran wants to keep her distance, where she's very good in open space with kicks and punches and has a high activity rate, while VanZant wants to close the distance, where she can either stifle her opponent by pushing them into the fence and working for takedowns, or just getting that inside position along the fence, or she definitely wants to get this fight to the ground. And she has multiple avenues to get it to the ground. Obviously, she has a decent double leg along the fence. She has some clinch takedowns, and she can throw her opponent. She actually tossed Tecia Torres over her hip with a nice head and arm throw in her only loss in MMA. So VanZant definitely does have some good avenues to get the fight to the canvas. And once she's there, her top position is actually pretty solid. She's not like an elite wrestler by any means, but she has very good positional control, and her submission game is solid, and she actually has a pretty high activity rate in terms of throwing punches to avoid stand-ups. So I actually am pretty high on VanZant's potential. The one thing that does scare me though is on the feet, VanZant really doesn't offer a whole lot. She was a bit of a punching bag against Torres. Torres really lit her up at times in that fight, but she's also tough as nails. And she proved that in her next fight, where she just walked forward, waded through a couple strikes, landed a big right hand, and then went right for the takedown. So she's going to be putting pressure on Curran. And if she can get her to the ground, I think Curran's going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, if Curran can keep the fight standing and stay at distance and pick apart VanZant from without getting backed into the fence, she's going to win this fight. So both girls have absolute clear and present ways to win this fight. But I think that Paige VanZant is going to be too aggressive. She's faced the better competition overall, and I think her experience and training and everything is going to factor in. And I see Paige VanZant walking away with the victory. My pick is Paige VanZant. So that does it for the Fight Pass prelims. So moving on to the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card, we have a lightweight battle between Eve Edwards, who is 42-21-1 with one no contest, taking on Akbar Arreola, who is 22-8-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Edwards minus 210 to come back on Arreola plus 160. And right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it's actually Edwards minus 195 to come back. Still plus 160 though on Arreola. So it basically just tightened up a little bit, and not a ton of action here. It's a hard fight to bet, honestly. I mean, skill set for skill set. There's no question Yves Edwards is by far the better fighter. I mean, he's had a great career overall. He's fought the who's who. In his weight class for sure along the way. I mean, the guy has been all over the world, been in several organizations. He's just one of these savvy vets that has always been kind of top of the food chain type of fighting. Now, that being said, he is 38 years old. He is getting up there to the point where, I mean, he has declined in his career. I mean, his chin is definitely suspect. He's been knocked out, I believe, 4 times now throughout his career, which is a little concerning. And his cardio, obviously, in his last fight, I mean, styles make fights. So against Holman, I mean, Holman kind of put it on him and wore him out a little bit. So I can understand he's such a good grinder. That Eve's cardio started to go a little bit. He was getting beat up. He didn't quite make it through. I mean, he got beat halfway through the 3rd round. By rear naked choke. So it finally took a toll on him. Now, I don't expect Arreola to be that successful. I mean, Holman's kind of a different level for sure than Arreola, but at the same time, Arreola is definitely that kind of fighter. He's a grappling based fighter that's going to look for takedowns the whole way through, and he likes to work his submissions on the ground. So he's going to look for top control, do some ground and pound, try to get Edwards back and try to submit him. But his wrestling is not up to par, and I think Edwards, more times than not, will be safe with stuffing takedowns, and on the feet, Edwards has a significant advantage. I mean, Edwards overall has decent takedown defense, and he's got a decent sub game in his own right, so he'll be good wherever the fight takes place. But, that being said, Arreola, you can't exactly count him out in this point of his career because he is the younger fighter, and Edwards' chin, I mean, it doesn't take much these days, I think, to rock him and clip him, and then Arreola could possibly hop on his back and sub him that way. Or, if Arreola is successful with his takedown game, then, I mean, he could give Edwards some problems there. So there's just so many question marks surrounding this fight. But more times than not, Edwards should win this fight. I mean, he is the better fighter for sure. It's going to be in his backyard, of course. Edwards is from Texas, and obviously this event's in Texas as well. So there's a lot of extra motivation coming into this fight. I think for Eves, he wants to keep his roster spot. Training with the American Top Team now. He's been training hard with Poirier. I know that as well. So Edwards has been putting in some work. So I'm expecting him to bounce back and look halfway decent in this fight. I mean, cause let's not forget, with all the signs of decline that I've just mentioned, I mean, he has been competitive against decent fighters. Against Cruikshank, he was very competitive. Against Valley Flag, he was very competitive. Both controversial decision losses. So he still has enough left probably in the tank to beat Arreola. So that's the way you got to go with this fight. But as far as the bet goes, it's kind of tricky laying 2-1 on Eves at this stage of his career, but I am going to pick him.
Yeah, and I agree, although it's scary. Arreola just isn't that good of a fighter. Obviously, he didn't get onto the Ultimate Fighter Season 15, and then in his last fight against Thiago Trader, even though he was a little bit bigger overall, you know, he just couldn't get enough going. I mean, he's got a decent pace, and he pushes forward, but he leaves his chin out, his defense is not good, and honestly, his offense, it more relies on landing a lucky punch because he's a little wild and sloppy. And the only thing that he's really got going for him is he has a decent trip takedown game, and if he can get on top, then he's okay. And against Edwards is just so experienced. There's nothing that Arreola is going to offer that he's not ready for. And it's not like Arreola is, you know, a spry chicken. I mean, the guy is, I believe, 31 years old. So even though Edwards is up there in years and experience, and especially fight years, because he's competed so often, I don't think that Arreola will have too much of an advantage there. Now, in terms of striking overall, Edwards is significantly more technical on the feet. He does a great job of moving and controlling distance and landing jabs and even having some power punches. The problem, of course, is for some reason in his last fight, after a really strong start against Piotr Hallman, Edwards just completely shut down, slowed down, got taken down and tapped out. It was very, very perplexing. And if he just doesn't have enough left in the tank to go 3 rounds, Arreola's going to work him over, even though Arreola doesn't have the greatest gas tank either. He definitely slowed down in the 3rd round of his UFC debut. But he might be able to outlast Edwards here if he pushes a hard enough pace. I am a little scared just because of all the damage and all the tough fights that Edwards has been in throughout his career, but I'm not gonna give up on Edwards just yet. I think that he is still significantly better overall than Arreola, and as long as he sticks to his guns and doesn't try to do too much, he should win this fight, but I'm not convinced enough that I'm going to bet on him or anything, but I am going to pick Edwards to pull this one out. Now, sticking with the lightweight division, we have James Vick, who is still unbeaten at 6-0, taking on Nick Hine, who is 11-1 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Vick opens minus 280, the comeback on Hine plus 200. Looking over at the line right now, action coming in on the dog because Vick is down at minus 215. The comeback on Hine is plus 170. Hine definitely a powerful guy. I mean, he's got that judo background. He's a southpaw. 155 seemed to suit him pretty well. And he's got an overall skill set that's solid, and he can definitely compete in the UFC with it. I mean, he had an impressive performance over Dober in his UFC debut for sure. So I think a lot of people were banking on maybe Hine being a bad matchup for Vick, but you know what? Styles make fights, and this is going to be an interesting fight. If Hine does come away with this victory here, I will be very impressed because I think it's a tough matchup for him. I mean, again, based on what I just said, Hine is a very powerful striker, but I think Vick's going to have the overall striking advantage. Vick is also going to have 10 inches of pure reach on the feet, and that's huge. I mean, make no mistake about it, it's very hard to get over a reach advantage that drastic. I mean, you have to adapt, and regardless of what training partners Hine has brought in, I mean, that's still going to be significantly tough to deal with. So I think Hine's best way to win this fight is probably getting Vick on the ground, utilizing his judo background, his wrestling, and getting the fight to the floor, ground and pound, maybe looking for a sub. That's very possible. And he's strong enough and capable to do that sort of thing. But at the same time, you got to look at Vick's takedown defense. Overall, Vick's he's shown a very solid wrestling base in his own right. I think he's very tough and difficult to deal with as far as takedowns go. And again, with that long reach, even if you get Vick on his back, he's kind of hard to deal with. I mean, he can definitely scramble back up, and get where he wants to be. And on the feet, he should have a significant advantage. If Vick doesn't just get caught by some kind of crazy haymaker power shot, I think he's going to be fine. And I think he could do more damage on the feet overall. Vick has a very sneaky good submission game, and that's always improving. So Vick's good on the ground. He's better standing up. And I think the reach advantage is going to come into play here so bad that it's going to factor into this fight for sure. So the signs all indicate that Vick's going to probably come away with this win. I mean, Vick has looked like a very good prospect overall. I don't even know if it's fair to say prospect at this point, but I mean, he could make some waves in the 155-pound division because he matches up well with most people. If you can't take him down, he might be able to outstrike you. If he can't outstrike you, he may be able to submit you. So he's well-rounded enough, and he's going to continue to improve his game that I think it's just a difficult matchup for Hine to win. So even though I was impressed with Hine in his UFC debut, I've been more impressed with Vick, and I think Vick has a lot more potential. So Vick's a younger, fresher fighter. He's got a lot more physical attributes to win this fight, and I think he's going to get it done. So my pick is going to be officially on Vick.
And I completely agree. Vick is just so much bigger than Nick Hine here. Even though Hine is that strong, stocky type, I just don't think that he possesses enough of a really talented takedown game to overcome the size advantage that Vick has. While Vick is hittable on the feet, it's not going to happen for him in terms of receiving that knockout or anything until he faces a really good technical counter striker, and Nick Hine is just not that type of fighter. He's more of a scrappy brawler type on the feet, real strong with some heavy kicks and punches. And while he does have a decent judo base, I think that James Vick's takedown defense is going to be good enough. I mean, he was able to fend off Ramsey Nijam pretty well and actually submit him during a takedown attempt. And, Hine definitely does not have the wrestling of Nijam. And one thing that I think Vick does very well is he fights long, because he is very long and lanky, and he reaches out there and uses his reach. He uses his legs and knees very often. He has a high activity rate. His accuracy isn't there, but it doesn't really matter when you're throwing that many strikes and keeping your opponent on the defensive. Unless Hine is willing to eat a few punches to land a few, he's going to be in some big trouble in this fight. It's taking place in Vick's backyard of Texas. The guy's nicknamed the Texecutioner for a reason, and I think they're basically importing Hine for this fight to get beat up. Kind of like, they had Hine for his UFC debut in Germany to look good in his, native country. So, it's just the opposite end of things this time around. Vick should have the advantage in the submission game. He should have the advantage in overall power. He should have the advantage with reach and height and striking overall. And I think it's just going to be a rough night for Nick Hine. He just isn't good enough to overcome a lot of the physical disadvantages that he's going to have in this fight. So my pick is going to be James Vick. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Luke Barnett, who is 8-1, taking on Roger Narvaez, who is 6-1. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Barnett, minus 315 the comeback on Narvaez, plus 235, and number of dimes right now, it's minus 325, plus 250. So line has increased, but not really much. It's gotten kind of tighter a little bit too, so I'm sure that parlays are what caused the line to move a little bit in Barnett's favor a little bit more. Styles make fights, and Narvaez did not have a very successful or good debut in his fight against Cummings for sure. Now he was out of his weight class and that was at 205, so you got to give the guy credit. He came into that fight, kind of he did take it on short notice, and he wasn't expected to really win that fight, and he just got pretty much destroyed in that fight. But again, styles make fights. This is a better weight class for him at 185 for sure. And he's got some interesting attributes to go along with, his skill set overall. He's got a good ground game. That's obviously his best attribute, Narvaez. He has decent takedowns, believe it or not. Good top control, good ground and pound, and he's also got a good sub game to go along with it. Standing, he does have a little bit of power, but it's really nothing great. His defense is really flawed too, obviously. And Barnett, I think, could take advantage of all those things. Now Barnett he continues to, improve his overall game. The guy on the feet, they call him the big slow for a reason. I mean, he is getting a little bit faster, but he's still a little bit slow and predictable, but he manages to get the job done. He's effective with his striking. He's got that long reach to go along with it too. Now, the funny thing is, even though, Barnett's actually 3 inches taller, he's going to be at a 2-inch reach disadvantage. So that's what comes into play here and makes things a little bit interesting. And Narvaez is also a southpaw. So I don't think Narvaez by any means is the better striker, but he does have enough power. And Barnett does have kind of a suspect type of chin that it could be interesting at times. But skill set for skill set, there's no doubt that Barnett's a better fighter. He's got good takedown defense, so I don't think Narvaez is going to be able to control him underground. I think Barnett's going to be able to keep this fight upright. And in the clinch, he's going to have a huge advantage. Barnett could be nasty on the clinch. And he's another one of these guys that keeps on improving as his time in the UFC progresses. I mean, there's no doubt that he's been pretty impressive. Even in his last fight, it was a very questionable decision to say the least. I know that, a lot of people could see Strickland winning, but most people actually out there thought that Barnett did enough to win that fight. So he could be coming in off of, instead of a loss, he could be coming in off of a win over a very solid opponent as well. So I think Barnett overall has looked very impressive, and he continues to get better. He's putting in the work. And stylistically, it's a pretty bad fight for Narvaez. I think he's going to have to get this fight underground. Barnett's not easy to control underground, so he's not going to be able to manage to do that. And on the feet, unless, Barnett just walks into something crazy, Narvaez isn't going to have success. So it's basically Barnett's fight to win or lose. I think he keeps the fight upright, and I think he does a lot more damage on the feet. And it's going to be interesting to see how much Barnett could really impress, and if he can manage to get himself into title contention eventually in UFC, because with his height and with his reach over most people, he does present some serious problems for a lot of people matchup wise. So I do have to lean with the overall favorite here, and I think Barnett's going to probably get the job done.
Honestly, Narvaez just isn't that great of an overall fighter. Obviously, his UFC debut went very poorly, but he was stepping up a weight class. I'm going to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt against Patrick Cummins. He got taken down and beaten up for a round and a half before finally getting finished. And against Barnett, he's actually fighting somebody who's a little bit taller and longer than Cummins. So, Barnett is a very difficult matchup for a lot of people because of his size. He's very awkward. And Narvaez, he really needs to get this fight to the ground where he can work top control, his jiu-jitsu, some nice submission work, and that's pretty much it. If he does not get this fight to the canvas, Barnett's probably going to tee off on him on the feet. Barnett is a pretty solid overall striker. Obviously he's not a quick or amazing athlete, but he's long, he knows how to use it, and he has some really solid power that he's been developing over the years. He's really showcased some serious improvements there. He's not just, outpointing opponents, he's finishing them on the feet. His last fight didn't go his way. It was very ugly, not an impressive performance, but he still should have won it. It was a very poor decision, one of the worst of 2014 in my opinion. But putting that behind me, I do think that if this fight stays standing, Barnett is not just going to win, he's probably going to finish Narvaez at some point. He does a pretty good job of following up. He has some good straight punches, some good hooks. He mixes things up well. His knees are actually pretty solid overall. And if Narvaez is sloppy with a takedown attempt, he's going to walk right into one. So there's a lot of things going against Narvaez here. And I just don't quite think that he is a good enough athlete or a good enough mixed martial artist overall to overcome them. And Barnett should be extremely motivated after that controversial decision loss. And he's probably going to come out red hot and try to put away Narvaez pretty quickly. And I think he can do it. So my pick is going to be Luke Barnett here, and I think he walks away with a stoppage victory. Now the final bout of the Fox Sports 1 prelims is a heavyweight contest featuring Ruslan Magomedov, who is 12-1, taking on Josh Copeland, who is 9-0. Now Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Magomedov minus 210, the comeback on Copeland plus 160. Another spot that just basically tightened up a little bit as far as line goes. Magomedov now is minus 205. The comeback on Copeland is plus 165. Interesting fight. I mean, Copeland, of course, getting his UFC debut. He's been impressive on some of the smaller shows. Exactly what I'm talking about. He was actually the RFA champion, heavyweight champion. So he's fought on Access TV before, and he's getting the respect he kind of deserves. I mean, he's an interesting, I don't know if I want to call him prospect at age 32, but he's definitely an interesting addition to the UFC heavyweight division. He trains with Grudge, which is obviously a very solid camp in Colorado. But the biggest thing about Copeland overall is that his power. I mean, he's an aggressive, brawling kind of style. He's a powerful guy. And that could present some serious problems for Magomedov. I'll just continue on with Copeland here real quick. His boxing and footwork are impressive for a big man. I mean, he actually, for being 265 pounds, he's actually pretty light on his feet. He moves well. He's accurate with his striking. He sets everything up pretty nice off of his nice lead jab. So it's impressive to see him utilize that boxing skill set. Now on the ground, he does have some wrestling. But he really, most of the time, prefers to stand and bang. But if he does get takedowns, you could sell with that much power. He could be very devastating on the ground as well. And he's got 4 subs on his record, so he's got some submissions to go along with it. Now, I think more than anything else for Copeland, he's going to want to keep this fight upright and start banging, actually, and try to knock Magomedov out cold. I mean, that's what Copeland does best. Magomedov, on the other hand, he's more of a technical fighter. I mean, he's got some good stand-up skill on his own. He doesn't have a lot of knockout power to go along with it, but he can definitely do some damage. In his debut fight, of course, with Pesta, I mean, Magomedov ran into some problems, though, I mean, with Pesta's power. So he's fighting another powerful heavyweight, in regards to Copeland, so he could struggle here as well. But Magomedov, give him credit, he did what he had to do. He survived some rough spots and ended up being impressive in that performance where he actually, won the decision, deservingly so. And he's a very skilled, very smart fighter. He's got some impressive wins on his resume, including, former UFC champion Tim Sylvia. I don't know how impressive it is these days, of course, I realize that, but still, I mean, the guy's been fighting on a decent European, circuit. I mean, he fought in Fight Night shows in Russia, of course, before he came into the UFC. So he's fought some solid competition. He even has a win over Rico Rodriguez on his resume as well. So Magomedov is kind of one of these guys that was a hyped prospect coming into the UFC. He performed and did what he had to do as far as getting the victory in his debut. And I think he's going to be a little bit more confident. He's going to be a little bit more comfortable, overall in this fight, but still, skill set for skill set, Magomedov doesn't have the best wrestling or the best takedown defense to go along with it or the best ground skill. So this fight probably will stay up on the feet. And if it does, we're going to see a striking battle. So I think Magomedov, if he can survive early on, he might do better in rounds 2 and 3 and outpoint Copeland, or even do enough damage on the feet, accumulative damage, that he could possibly finish Copeland as the fight goes on. But overall, I think it's going to be more dangerous for Magomedov early on. I think Copeland, with his power and with his confidence and making his UFC debut and with the adrenaline early on, and I mean, he's going to bring it. And I think there's a really good chance Copeland catches Magomedov and finishes him in the first round. So I've been going kind of back and forth on this fight, to be honest with you, as far as pure pick, because I could see Magomedov kind of stealing a decision or, like I said, finishing late. or I can see Copeland actually landing that knockout blow that he's so good at doing and just devastating Magomedov early. So I'm going to go with Copeland. I'm going to pick the underdog here. I think that more times than not, I mean, stylistically, he's a pretty good matchup, and he trains with a good camp, and he's going to be prepared for Magomedov. So a lot of hype behind him, and I believe some of that hype is true. So I'm going to go out on a limb and pick the underdog here to win it.
Magomedov, while he is a pretty solid technical overall fighter, he does have some problems when getting pressured by his opponents, and there is no fighter in the heavyweight division right now that pressures their opponent more than Josh Copeland. This guy comes out, he's a pretty solid overall athlete, and he just pushes forward throwing big punches. And training out of grudge, you know that he's training in elevation, and he's going to have at least enough cardio for about a round and a half to really do some damage. In his last fight where he won the RFA heavyweight title against Jan Jorgensen, Jorgensen was a pretty good prospect, and Copeland just walked right through him, eating a couple shots to dish out some big punishment, and eventually he just overwhelmed him. And I think he could do the same thing to Magomedov. Magomedov is a solid technical striker that does his best work when he's at distance, peppering away with, some pitter-patter jabs and scoring some points. He's not like a huge knockout threat. And on the ground, he's actually pretty decent as well. But Copeland is the type of guy that's gonna really make Magomedov work. He's gonna push forward. He's gonna be throwing big bombs. And Magomedov, while he is overall pretty good technical and has some decent defense, he can get hurt. As you saw in the Pesta fight, he ate a big knee against the fence, got dropped. And Pesta, honestly, doesn't have that much power. He's not a big knockout threat. He's not a very good striker. And Copeland, in my opinion, is a significantly better striker than Pesta. And he is strong enough and aggressive enough that if he hits Magomedov, he's not going to just start being wild and crazy trying to finish the fight all hectic. He'll be composed and really start pouring it on. So the way this fight's going to play out is either Josh Copeland is going to get that quick knockout, just like he's been doing throughout his amateur or his regional fighting career, or Magomedov is going to weather that storm and win the last 2 rounds and win a decision. And I'm leaning on the side of Copeland, especially since Magomedov did get dropped in his UFC debut. I think Copeland can overcome. Copeland can go in there as the underdog and land some big bombs and make a very impressive UFC debut in the heavyweight division. So my pick is going to be Josh Copeland as well. Now, kicking off the main card on Fox Sports 1 is a lightweight battle with Matt Wiman, who is 15-7, taking on Isaac Valley Flag, who is 14-5-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifting so far?
I opened Wiman minus 230, the comeback on Valley Flag plus 170. And since that time, it's actually Wiman minus 230 plus 170. So no movement. The action's been steady two-way action. It seems like it's a fair line. And you know what? It's hard to gauge where really Wiman is at this stage of his career. He's been out since January of 2013. In his devastating KO loss to TJ Grant. That was his last performance. Now, of course, I can give Wiman a lot of credit for that loss because he fought one of the best lightweights in the world at that point. I mean, let's not forget how much of a role TJ Grant was at that time. I mean, he earned a title shot for a reason, and Grant's legit. It's unfortunate he's been out so long as well. But that being said, so Wiman was actually on a pretty good roll up until that point himself. Skill set for skill set, it's not even close, I think. Wiman is by far the better fighter in almost every area. He can out-wrestle him. His jiu-jitsu is better. I think he's a better striker at times. Valley Flag, the thing that he's got going for him the most is just his toughness and his grinding style. I mean, the guy always pushes forward. He's so aggressive. He eats a lot of punishment, but he can take it. And the judges love his heart and the way he just goes about pushing the pace in fights. And a lot of times it makes the fights relatively close and it sways the judging to his favor. So that's one big concern here. And he pushes such a high pace with Wyman's layoff. I mean, he's been out again since 2013. I mean, I kind of question his cardio at times. I mean, he's had some questionable cardio, spotty cardio throughout his career. And I guess Valley Flag pushing at such a high pace is going to be interesting to see if Wiman can go 3 strong against that relentless kind of pace there too. But I mean, skill set for skill set, make no mistake about it. Wiman is by far the better fighter, so it's hard not to pick him. I hope that he shows up here and he looks close to form because Wiman's a very talented fighter. He's fun to watch, and he could do a lot of great things in the cage. So my official pick is going to be Wiman, but as far as a betting standpoint, it's kind of a dog or pass situation only because of the pace Valley Flag pushes, the state of MMA judging out there, and the question marks about Wiman. But like I said, my official pick is going to be Matt Wiman to win the fight, though.
And I completely understand the pick of Matt Wiman. I mean, the guy, skill for skill, is definitely better than Isaac Valley Flag. He mixes it up better. He has much better wrestling, top control, submissions, and on the feet, they're relatively even. The main thing that scares me, and honestly, it's scaring me so much that I'm probably going to end up picking Valley Flag, is the fact that Wiman has been so inactive lately. He has not fought since January of 2013, so it'll be about 22 months since his last fight when he finally steps in the cage here against Valley Flag. And, while he did fight somebody really good in TJ Grant in his last fight, he got absolutely mauled. He offered absolutely nothing and just got slaughtered. So that is a big concern to me. Now, Valley Flag, while there's really nothing special about him, as Nick mentioned, he does have this judge-friendly style where he's constantly moving forward, throwing a lot of punches at a high volume, even if they don't land, and he has a ton of heart. He will stay in a fight and brawl and just go for it. And I'm going to be very interested to see how Wiman responds to that. Now, if Wiman is able to implement his wrestling and get on top, it's going to be very difficult for the judges to take that away from him. Top control is just so important in MMA. And Wiman does have the better wrestling. So, Valley Flag has a tendency to occasionally get stuck on his back. He does not have the best ground game. So, if Wiman gets on top, he will win a decision. But if this fight turned into a stand-up war, which I have a feeling it might, then I think Valley Flag is going to walk away with a judge's decision here just because of his volume, his pace, his judge-friendly style, and the way that he never stops moving forward. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you're right about a few big things. First of all, lots of layoffs is a bad thing. Ring rust is a negative factor for MMA fighters, and Wiman just hasn't been active lately. However, he is also the much younger fighter here. Valley Flag is pushing 37, Wiman still 31. And Wiman is, I think, more experienced in terms of high-level competition. He's been in with some better guys, and his submission game is clearly superior. But on paper, Valley Flag is the higher rate striker. He just throws more volume and he's more accurate. However, he also leaves open a big hole. His defense is terrible. But Matt Wiman really isn't a power striker or a volume guy that's going to be able to take advantage of that. He's too much of a counter striker, a lower pace. So I don't see that as being an issue. On the mat, while Wiman's stats are kind of average, they are superior to Valley Flag. So, he gets the edge there, but there's also some question marks. So I think if this stays standing, I think Valley Flag does have the tools to win rounds. Just based on the fights that we've looked at, his rate of striking is abnormally high. And I'm talking like more than twice the normal rate. He's been in some just flurry, furious, barn burners when standing, but on the mat, he's been put on his back most of the time, and that's a huge red flag for a submission guy like Wiman. So I see issues on both sides of the page here. I also see a lot of red flags for unknowns. So this is probably one I'm avoiding altogether in terms of confidence because you never know. Yes, there is upset potential, but yes, the favorite is probably the deserved favorite on paper. So it's a tough one.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have former title contender Joseph Benavidez, who is 20-4, taking on Dustin Ortiz, who is 14-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Benavidez minus 405, the comeback on Ortiz plus 285. And right now the line over 5 dimes is actually Benavidez minus 400. Benavidez is minus 400. The comeback on Ortiz is plus 310. So line basically just got a little bit tighter. And it's been steady action again there. I'm sure Benavidez is going to hop in some parlays for a lot of people out there. I mean, cause he's one of the best at 125, had his chance at the title a couple of times. Unfortunately, he ran into, Demetrius Johnson, and it just seems like stylistically it's a bad matchup for him, even though he's very competitive in most cases in that fight. But here he's fighting another up-and-coming contender in Ortiz. Ortiz has looked great, especially in recent performances. He's the type of guy that continues to get better. I mean, he's only 25 years old, so it seems like he's got a ton of experience for being so young and against solid competition overall. I mean, his last fight against Scoggins was controversial. His fight before that against Borg was controversial as well. But at the same time, he was close enough and competitive enough with two very talented guys that he made it possible for the judges to kind of have those controversial type decisions. So there were coin flip fights, which, I mean, different set of judges would see it different ways possibly. So those are two losses he could possibly have. But, I mean, you could give him that win over Moraga too. So it kind of works for you at times. It kind of works against you. But that being said, Ortiz has still been fighting top-notch competition, and he's been performing really well. And he gets better with each fight, I think, overall. Now, Benavidez, of course, like I said, he's had the title shot a couple times. He's beat a solid competition throughout his career as well. He's a little bit older. He's 30 years old. So I'm expecting at any time a little bit of a decline from Benavidez. I mean, he's accomplished pretty much everything minus the title, at 125. He's even had the shot at 135. So he's accomplished so much in his career. He's been with a great camp. The guy has devastating knockout power, good wrestling, sick submission game to go along with it. I mean, he's the man. So you got to respect Benavidez and what he could do. And I think stylistically he is kind of a bad matchup for Ortiz, but I do think Ortiz is going to be really competitive. Another spot where the line is probably inflated a little bit, but it's hard to pick against Benavidez because I mean, he has the power on the feet. If he grabs your neck, no matter how good your, subdy usually is, he could finish things, of course, with that choke. And then as far as wrestling goes, I think Ortiz can be competitive in the wrestling department, but Benavidez probably has a little edge there as well. So, it should be a fun fight because I can see it's kind of going back and forth as far as on the ground. If it does hit the ground momentarily, I think these guys will scramble back and forth a little bit. On the feet, I think Ortiz is going to be maybe more of the verse striker, but Benavidez is going to land the harder shots overall too, and he's a little bit more dangerous. So I'm going to lean Benavidez, but it's a spot where you got to be careful if you're going to throw him in parlays because this is a spot maybe where we do see some sign of a decline with Benavidez, and we've seen a big step up for Ortiz. This is an important win for him. If Ortiz wins this fight, he gets himself in real title contention. So he knows that. Everybody pretty much is aware of this, so we got to be careful here. But I think Benavidez should get the nod more times than not.
Dustin Ortiz is a very good fighter, and he's definitely not somebody you should be sleeping on. But Joseph Benavidez overall is the better fighter. He displayed some serious power in after dropping down to the flyweight division. He scored several knockouts. His submission game is top notch. His wrestling game is there. Ortiz, he's more of a scrappy striker, not very technical, but he knows what he's doing. And his wrestling game is actually significantly better than I gave him credit for. And something that I've been very impressed with is he just does not stop throwing strikes. He will throw when the fight's up close and personal. He'll throw from distance. He'll throw while fending off takedown attempts. He'll throw during a failed takedown attempt, and he definitely will throw ground and pound when he gets top position. So this is a guy that just never stops throwing, and I think that's very important. It keeps him active. It helps him get some decisions that even you might not have scored him for. So he has a very sneaky activity level, which I think helps him out quite a bit. And something else that really helps him is, he's very accurate because his timing on all the times he throws is he always waits until the fight's up close because he doesn't have a great reach and he's able to connect. So he does a really good job of staying active and keeping strikes constantly flowing out. While Benavidez, on the other hand, much less accurate, but when he does connect, he makes you pay. So this is a very interesting clash, but overall, I do see Benavidez able to implement a little bit of his wrestling if the stand-up isn't working, and from distance, I can see him coming inside with a big overhand right and clocking Ortiz, and I think it's going to be difficult for Ortiz to get off on a lot of his strikes that he likes to throw because Benavidez isn't going to let him get in many advantageous positions. So unless Ortiz hurts Benavidez, and we have seen Benavidez get hurt quite a few times now on the feet, then I really think that this is Benavidez' fight to lose. So I'm going to pick Benavidez, but I think that him at minus 400, the line is definitely way off. It should be closer. So Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, on paper, you could say that Benavidez has slight edges overall over Ortiz, but then once you factor in the strength of the schedule that he's faced compared to Ortiz, I think that gets inflated significantly. So Benavidez really does have decent stats considering who he's been in the cage with for extended periods of time, and really his only losses are against champion caliber guys. So you mentioned his knockdown rate. He scored 6 knockdowns to date. He's a southpaw. He mixes in a lot of kicks to his striking attack, which I think deflates his accuracy, but I think it helps him win rounds because he does also tend to outwork his opponents. It's not that he's working at a very high pace necessarily. He's just controlling the cage and forcing other people backwards. And he's able to do that with a very good defense. So he has excellent strike avoidance. He stays out of trouble normally with the exception of what we saw against his, in the title fight when he got knocked out. But that was shocking because it was so unusual. We didn't expect to see that. I think overall Benavidez solid everywhere. He's going to have the team alpha male wrestling and dangerous guillotine chokes. He has generally been in control on the ground. Not to say Ortiz's stats are bad. He holds his own. He's average in a number of metrics, maybe even a little bit above average in a few. I just don't think that's enough to threaten a guy like Joseph Benavidez, who has been at the top of the game for a very long time. So you're right about the point of the betting lines. I mean, runaway favorites are always dangerous. It just presents very low value. There's always the puncher's chance. There's always the injury chance. I mean, you never know if someone's going to break their hand on the first punch and it just changes the outcome of the fight. So always be careful when laying that kind of juice. But I think Joseph Benavidez is very much a justifiable favorite.
Now moving all the way up to the heavyweight division, we have Jared Rosholt, who is 11-1, taking on Alexei Oleinik, who is 49-9-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Rosholt minus 230, the comeback on Oleinik plus 170, and right now over at Dimes it is Rosholt minus 220, the comeback on Oleinik plus 180. So another spot that just kind of tightened up. And a lot of, two-way action and two-way support. A lot of people, I think, don't have quite enough faith in Rosholt overall. And, man, Oleinik, I mean, what can you say about the guy? First of all, the guy is 37 years old. He's been around for a long time, so he's a very savvy vet. And what the most impressive part about Oleinik's game is that submission game. I mean, you know what he does best. I mean, obviously check out the Hamilton fight and his UFC debut. That neck crank is what he seems to do best there, but especially as of late. So very devastating with this submission game. I mean, if you get to the ground with this guy, you're not going to survive too long. That's, those are the odds. So Oleinik has a way to win this fight over, and has a way to win fights over most heavyweights. That's how he's been successful in his career, and that's definitely his ground attribute. So he's a very strong, smart fighter that is able, in most cases, to get the fight to the ground and have success with his submission game. But he's facing Rosholt, which is obviously a stud wrestler that has a ton of power and should be able to keep this fight upright. And if it stays upright, minus a little bit of questionable defense at times with Rosholt, and Oleinik does have a little bit of power on the feet, so if he lands something crazy, then I could see possibly Oleinik finishing Rosholt. But more times than not, it shouldn't happen. If it stays standing, Rosholt is the better striker by far. And if you look at the KO ratio, I mean, Oleinik has been KO'd 4 times throughout his career. Rosholt, even though he's not known for this big slugger or knockout artist, he keeps on improving his overall game, and he's more than capable of finishing Oleinik on the feet. So if it stays upright, I think that the fight is going to be Rosholt's to win or lose. I mean, as long as his defense holds up, he's going to be landing the more effective punishment, and he should be able to at least grind out a very dominant performance on the feet as the fight keeps going. But I don't think Oleinik is going to be able to withstand Rosholt's punishment. Now, at the same time, if you do put Oleinik on his back and Rosholt gets top position, I can see Rosholt dropping some ground and pound and having his way with him as well. I mean, a lot of grapplers at times aren't as big of a threat as we all know if you put him on their back. And Oleinik is another one of those guys. He is a lot better when he's in top position. He's far more dangerous. So Rosholt, he trains with a great camp. Obviously, we know that. with Team Takedown. So they work the ground, they work all aspects of the game. He's going to be prepared. He's a very smart fighter. He knows what to expect out of Oleinik. So I'm not really thinking that Oleinik is going to come in here and pull off this upset win. I think that Roussel, more times than not, is going to be able to implement his style of fighting and his game plan and come away with a W here. So I think it's pretty clear cut. I mean, you can never count out Oleinik. He's such a slick fighter, that, it's not really a great idea to lay heavy juice against a guy like that, but there might be value on Roussel still around 2-1 or so, or just barely over 2-1, because I think more times than not, Roussel should, again, implement that game plan, keep it upright, and do some damage. Or if he wants to get top control, he should be the one on top. So I think Roussel's going to win this fight.
Oleinik is very talented submission artist, but he's at his best when he's in top position. He's not a huge threat from bottom. He doesn't, throw up a whole bunch of triangle chokes or anything. He lands all these crazy other things like, really good neck cranks or Ezekiel chokes or other stuff from top position. And I just don't see him getting on top of Jared Roussel. Roussel is too good of a wrestler, scrambles too well, has those grappling instincts from all those years of wrestling that if they go to the ground, Roussel's going to get on top. Oleinik will end up pulling guard, and he's just going to have to be defensive. And really the only way I see Oleinik winning this fight is if Roussel leaves an opening on the feet and eats a big shot. And even then, I really don't think Oleinik is going to be able to do that. He's just is a little too old, a little too slow, and Roussel, while, not the greatest athlete in the world, he is talented and quick enough to avoid most of what Oleinik's going to be trying to throw at him. And I can see Roussel outworking him on the feet. I can see Roussel really pressuring him against the fence and dishing out some punishment there. And then if and when the fight does go to the ground, Roussel will be in top position, dropping some punches and some elbows. I just don't see a lot of ways for Oleinik to pull this fight out, especially by submission, which is how he wins almost all of his fights. I think it's going to be very difficult for him to pull off a sub here, and it's going to be a bit of a fish out of the water here, and I think Roussel will be looking really good. The Team Takedown fighter fighting out of Texas, real close to that Oklahoma home. And I think, you're going to see a really breakout performance here from Jared Roussel, similar to his last fight against Soa Palele, where, he just has a really solid overall winning every round type of performance. So my pick is going to be Jared Roussel. Now dropping all the way down to the flyweight division again, we have Brad Pickett, who is 25-9, taking on Chico Camus, who is 14-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open Pickett minus 210. The comeback on Camus is plus 160. And right now over at 5 dimes is still Pickett minus 210. The comeback on Camus, though, is a little bit tighter. It's plus 175 now. Now, at one point, Pickett did get bet up a little bit more, and now we're getting some action back in Camus as well. So there is two-way support on this fight. Early action was on Pickett, late action coming in on the dog. I think it's going to be an interesting fight. I'm glad to see Camus actually drop down to 125. I think this division suits him well. For Pickett, unfortunately for him, I mean, he hasn't really lived up to what we thought he would at 125 since he's dropped down as well. I mean, obviously for me, I have a ton of respect for Pickett because I got to check him out early on when he was fighting in the UK on some of the smaller cards over there. And I get to see, I've said it time and time again for those of you guys that listen to the podcast, the improvement level of Brad Pickett. I mean, he's put the work in with American Top Team and he made himself the fighter that he is today. Of course, with good coaching staff and good training partners around him, but he absorbs everything so well. So he got to the level that he's at right now by putting in hard work. So much respect for Pickett. But unfortunately at 125 again, against Ian McCall, he got beat by decision there. Against Siri, he actually performed not that well. I mean, that fight was a lot closer than people ever imagined it would be against Siri. Now, Siri's a very solid guy, of course, but still, I mean, people were expecting better things from Pickett. So I think he's been struggling kind of at 125 overall. He is getting up there in age. He's 36 years old. So his chin has always been a little bit suspect. I mean, he only has one official knockout loss on his resume, but he's been rocked several times throughout his career. And by being 36 at this stage in his career, it's only going to get worse. So I'm kind of afraid that Camus might actually, even though he's not known for his knockout power, he has extremely good and underrated boxing. I think Camus might check that chin along the way. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Camus actually finishes this fight and knocks Pickett out, which most of us are not expecting to happen here. As far as Pickett's stand-up goes, though, I mean, he's definitely game. I mean, he's got offensively, he's got some serious power to go along with a decent skill set. He's got good, clean technique. He mixes up his combinations well. He's a smart fighter. So even on the feet, I think it will be close back and forth. I'm not saying Camus is going to come in and dominate on the feet, but that being said, I think at this point, Camus is the fresher, the younger fighter. I think that he's dropping down to 125. He's not going to have some of those, we'll see. I guess we'll have to see how he looks at the weigh-ins, but he's not going to have as many question marks, in my opinion, as Pickett does at this stage in his career. So I think Camus is going to do more than well on the feet. I think he's going to be able to scramble and get out of some bad spots along the way, if Pickett does put him on the ground. And I think that, he's going to actually impress and probably hang in there as well as, anybody thought he would. Now, that being said, you have the skill set for skill set. I think Pickett is the better fighter. I think he is going to be a little bit longer. He's got a couple inches of pure reach on the feet. Again, he's got a good fight IQ. He's got the better wrestling overall. I think Pickett, he's got very underrated wrestling. So he should be able to control the tempo of the fight. So I have to slightly lean towards Pickett, but as far as betting goes, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's a dog or pass situation for sure. I think that Pickett, more times than not, especially if he doesn't get knocked out or caught or anything like that, should win this fight, but I'm expecting Camus to show up and be competitive. So even though I think by a thinner margin than most people realize, Pickett is the better fighter, I think Camus is going to be game enough. So I am going to pick Pickett because, again, he is the better fighter from top to bottom overall, I think. But I'm not necessarily confident in this pick. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but my official pick will be Pickett, but it's dog or pass.
And I agree. Camus is a decent overall fighter, but honestly, when you look at it, Brad Pickett is a little bit better in just about every area except probably accuracy. The main thing here, Pickett's been in there against a lot of really good fighters throughout his career, and he's beaten some, he's lost to quite a few of them, but he's been very competitive with a lot of the top guys. And Camus just hasn't quite caught on yet in the UFC. All of his wins are against really lower tier UFC fighters. And, other than, Kyung Ho Kang, which honestly, he should not have got the win. And in this fight, I do think that it's a good thing that Camus is dropping down to flyweight. He was definitely an undersized bantamweight, but again, Brad Pickett was a bantamweight and held his own against some of the best in the world there. So, the only thing that scares me with Pickett, honestly, is his chin. He's 36 years old. He's been in a ton of crazy wars, and, he definitely cannot take a punch like he used to. I mean, if he gets hit with a decent shot, he goes down. He's been knocked down quite a few times. He hasn't been cleanly knocked out yet, but he has been knocked down to the point where, he ended up getting submitted or something like that. So that is a concern. But again, against Camus, I'm not quite as scared about it as in some other fights, like in his fights against like Michael McDonald or, some big power punchers like Eddie Wineland, guys like that, Hine and Barao. And in this fight, if the stand-up isn't going well, I think Pickett can fall back on his wrestling. He has a pretty solid overall grappling game, and his submission arsenal is fantastic. I mean, this is a guy that pulled off a Peruvian necktie in the WEC. You cannot sleep on Brad Pickett's submissions. He is very, very competent there. And on the feet, while he's not the greatest stand-up fighter, he does push a high pace. He's active. He has some power, as is evident by his knockout of Yves Jabouin, but he definitely should be a little cautious against Camus, because Camus could be sneaky here, and especially if Pickett's sleeping on Camus's stand-up. Now, honestly, the main reason I like Pickett is he's tough to finish even if he's getting hurt on the feet, because he will fall back on the grappling. And I really do see Pickett going in for something to try to take Camus down if he gets in trouble on the feet, and going for a choke, because Camus is susceptible to some good submission fighters, like Dustin Kimura. So, and I feel Pickett is a much better overall grappler than Kimura, especially from top position. So, my pick's gonna be Pickett, but I am a little cautious because he's getting up there in years, and the chin is definitely starting to go. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you're right on a few big important things, and let's start with Pickett. He is getting older, now north of 36, and he has been dropped 4 times. Part of that is because his head strike defense is really way below average. And this is at flyweight. I mean, at flyweight, guys are fast, they're elusive, which is why overall accuracy tends to be lower in that division. And yet here he is, he's getting clipped almost 40% of the time with power head strikes. He's better against the jab, but he does get hit, and that has led to him getting dropped. And so Chico Camus, not necessarily a power striker, or at least he hasn't scored any knockdowns in the UFC, but he does have good accuracy. He lands with 33% success. He has a lower pace though, and he tends to be a counter striker, although the same could be said, well, at least for Pickett in terms of, his volume control, the overall rate is higher. So on the feet, it's a bit of a wash. Pickett might be throwing a little more volume, but Camus should be landing more strikes. That does concern me. If you're going on the favorite Pickett, first of all, that's a lot of juice to lay on a 36-year-old guy who has a tendency to walk into punches. It could play into Camus's favor. Now on the mat, I think it's also kind of weird. You've got takedown defense for Camus is just atrocious. It's not to say that Brad Pickett's takedown offense is great, but he is the more likely fighter to attempt takedowns. And against Camus's defense, which is very, very poor. So Pickett has generally been on top, which again would help him win rounds. It's just that overall he hasn't been very efficient. He tends to get beaten up by guys and not deliver enough punishment to win, whereas Camus is the reverse. He just tends to be a little bit more efficient overall. So this is very, very close on paper. There's a few stylistic advantages that each guy has. The line seems to be moving away from center, if anything. So I would avoid that. If anything, maybe potential underdog play if the price is right.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a lightweight contest between Bobby Green, who is 23-5, taking on Edson Barboza, who is 14-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened it near Pick'em with a slight edge towards Bobby Green. Minus 125 Green, Barboza minus 115 was the opening line, and right now it is actually Pick'em minus 115 either way over time. So Barboza did get bet up early, to the point where you could have found Green probably around plus 135 or so, but now it has come back down to a Pick'em. So again, two-way action on this fight for sure. A lot of people out there are split on this fight, and it's a very difficult one for sure. There's no doubt about it because both these guys, I think, have a way they can win the fight. Starting with Barboza, of course. I mean, the guy's one of the most talented fighters that's ever been in the UFC as far as offensive attack goes. I mean, nasty leg kicks. He's got a tremendous amount of power. The guy's very accurate. He's going to have a 4-inch reach advantage over Green on the feet, which could come into play as well. And he's just a complete overall striker. No doubt about it. But the problem with Barboza is, of course, that chin. Now, he's only been officially knocked out one time, but he's been rocked through several fights in his career. He's managed in most cases to survive and bounce back and make things interesting at least. But just like his last fight, his last loss against Cerrone, I shouldn't say his last fight because he's coming off a win over Dunham, but against Cerrone, he got, rocked and then submitted there too. So it's almost like, in my opinion, he's almost had 2 knockout losses officially. As far as the UFC goes, even though that counts as a sub. So that's a concern with Barboza. I mean, it just, unfortunately for him, it doesn't seem like he could take much damage, as far as his chin goes. And against powerful strikers, he could be in trouble, even if he is the more talented of the two, in that realm. So Green, on the other hand, his striking is definitely improving. He gets better. He gets more confident. He's looked very good in his recent performances as well. You gotta tip your hat off to him. I mean, he came in and, fought Josh Thompson on short notice and he looked pretty solid in that fight for sure. Thompson is a very legit, lightweight, and Green, that was by far his biggest win, the biggest win of his career. I mean, he performed really well. He was pushing the pace, kind of frustrated Thompson along the way. And that's kind of what Green can do to you. I mean, I think he's an all-around fighter where he has solid wrestling. His takedown defense is legit as well. But his stand-up, his movement overall, can be very effective, and he mixes things up well enough. He has that power to go along with it. So he's a very complete MMA fighter that just keeps on getting a new level of confidence and improvement along the way. He is. It's rumored that he's training with the Diaz brothers now, so I think that's only going to help him overall, as far as his skill set improve and get a little bit more confidence and properly train better a little bit as well, because there's been some question marks for sure in the past with Bobby Green's training camp. So I think if he addresses some of those issues, he's only going to get that much better as well. How these guys match up, I mean, Barboza on the feet is going to have the advantage. I think Green can knock Barboza out. He can catch that chin. He can decision Barboza as well. But you could say a lot of the same things with Barboza and Green. I think Barboza can outpoint Green on the feet. His takedown defense is legit enough that he should be able to maintain it upright. If not, if you do take Barboza down, he manages to scramble back up more times than not, and basically dictate and control the pace of the fight. So he has those exact same ways to win the fight. But overall, I gotta trust Bobby Green just slightly more. I think that his chin is more solid. As the fight goes on, even if Barboza's winning the fight, I think Green is capable of landing that shot that just changes the complexion of the fight completely and comes away with the W here. So at pick'em price, could be some value on Green. I think that as far as a pick goes, I have to kind of side with Bobby Green as well, because I think that he does have that slight edge. You know what you're getting in him. He's just a little bit more solid overall at this point. But man, this should be a great fight for sure. But my official pick is going to be Green.
And I completely agree, actually. These guys, in terms of pure stand-up skill, Edson Barboza is the better fighter. He has a slightly better reach. He kicks a little bit more. But that chin is just terrifying. It's not even like Edson Barboza is getting, knocked out by huge shots. I mean, obviously Jamie Varner's punches were very big. But against Donald Cerrone, I mean, that was a jab as he was moving backwards, and Barboza just got toasted by it. So this is a guy that has all the talent in the world on the feet, but just a huge, huge drawback in the fact that if he gets hit by something clean, he's going down. Danny Castillo had him in huge trouble. Varner obviously knocked him out in the first round, and Cerrone blasted him with that jab and dropped him to set up a submission. So Bobby Green, considering how accurate he is on the feet, it's very scary as long as he's able to land with something decent. And Bobby Green has some good power. He's not the best power puncher in the UFC lightweight division, not by a landslide, but he is a very good technical striker. He was able to go in there against Josh Thompson and hold his own in the feet. I mean, he looked really good. So I'm definitely concerned here against Edson Barboza. And unless Edson can really get going with those leg kicks early, slow Bobby Green down and, eventually wear him down and land a big knockout blow with a kick or some accumulation of punches, then Bobby Green is probably going to clip Edson Barboza at some point in this fight and get the finish. You got to remember, Bobby Green is solid in the clinch. He has above average wrestling, and if all else fails, he could revert back to the wrestling. So I got to go with Bobby Green here, and he is my pick. So Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, Edson Barboza, we know what he's best at, and that's striking. His knockdown rate is ridiculous. He scored 8 knockdowns. He'll probably end up on one of the top 10 lists. And just on a punch for punch basis, now granted it's not just punches, it's a lot of kicks. His rate is just ridiculous. So, way above the heavyweight average. He is extremely dangerous. He has a long reach for a lightweight. That's what he's good at. Now his accuracy is about average, but again, he's a guy who uses a lot of kicks, which drops your accuracy, but increases your power. He also mixes in a lot of diversity. So nearly 20% of his standing strikes are aimed at the legs. That's twice the average. Way more body kicks than usual. So he has a very diverse striking attack. It's very dangerous, powerful, and he controls the cage. And I think because he uses his legs so much. On the flip side, that chin, you guys have mentioned this. He's been dropped several times now. So on a punch for punch basis, his chin is now migrated below normal. In fact, I wouldn't even give credit to one of his knockdowns. I would chalk it up as 3 knockdowns at this point. Varner, Cerrone, and Danny Castillo. He only has logged 2 on paper, so I would even inflate that number from what I'm seeing here. So that's a big risk. And how do you take advantage of a guy with a tough chin or, a fragile chin? Bobby Green is extremely accurate. He's not as much at a size disadvantage as most opponents of Barboza. It's not a huge differential. But most guys facing Barboza are way worse off. And Bobby Green's accuracy with his power strikes, 46%. I mean, that's nearly twice the UFC average. And he's been doing that. He did it against Josh Thompson for several rounds, and Josh Thompson is no joke. So I am seeing some factors here. You always worry about Barboza throwing some crazy kick, getting a knockout, finishing the fight. If he doesn't do that, he might be in trouble here against Bobby Green, who's certainly not the bigger name, but I think, or at least as the betting line suggests, very even give and take here. I don't expect Barboza to want to take this to the ground, and Bobby Green is another guy who doesn't attempt a lot of takedowns. He attempts slightly more than Barboza, but I think they will probably duke this out. And you gotta think that Bobby Green is going to be landing some punches, and that could cause a problem at some point for Barboza. Now, in terms of raw pace, volume control, it's almost dead even. Maybe a slight advantage to Barboza because he does keep people at the end of his range because of the kicks. But in just terms of who's throwing more volume, it's very, very close. So this boils down to the power of Barboza, but also his vulnerability and Bobby Green's accuracy. So that makes a very interesting matchup. And depending on how much we want to downgrade Barboza for his knockdown resiliency, you might say if this is a coin on the betting lines, it might be a slight lean towards Green because he could be just the more accurate guy.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, dropping down to the featherweight division, we have the main event of the evening between former champion Frankie Edgar, who is 16-4-1, taking on Cub Swanson, who is 21-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Edgar minus 190 to come back on Swanson plus 150. And now looking over at the lines, a little bit more action coming in on Frankie. He's minus 250 to come back on Swanson is plus 190. Not really surprised. I mean, Frank Edgar, at lightweight, I mean, he was for a while, clapped in all areas. I mean, in and outside of the cage. I mean, and the talent that he's got throughout his career. I mean, he's fought the who's who, on his resume, and he's done fairly well, beat most of those guys, of course. So Frankie Edgar's a very complete fighter. You gotta respect the guy, what he could do. You got arguably, I think, some wrestling that's ever been in the UFC because he's taken down guys. I mean, he comes from a wrestling background, of course, but he's still taken down a lot of guys that, really have had pretty solid takedown defense throughout their career. So you gotta give him that edge. He's a very solid grappler. He's got decent BJJ to go along with it. He doesn't use the submission game that often, but he still has it. On the feet, I mean, of course, he's fast, he's powerful. He can do damage, he can outpunch you. I mean, Edgar is just a complete fighter. Like I said, he just much respect for the guy. So I understand why this is a difficult matchup and a difficult test for Swanson. I mean, Swanson, in my opinion, has improved tremendously. I mean, looking back at the earlier WEC fight compared to now, I mean, there's no question that he's been putting in the work with his good, obviously training partners over at Jackson's, and the good coaching has really helped his game. He's getting confidence by fight, really, overall. I mean, Swanson keeps on improving, and he's really notched some solid wins. I mean, his win over Stevens was very impressive. I mean, Stevens, at 145 is a very solid opponent for him, and he looked great in that fight. He knocked out Severs, so you can say, that was a solid win for him as well. His fight with Poirier was a war. So I think Swanson just keeps on improving with every fight, and I think his speed, his power, his wrestling to go along with it, everything with Swanson is really adding up to have him at this point in his career where he could be a contender for 145 title. I mean, I know he's fought Jose Aldo in the past, but that was legitly a different Cub Swanson. I know people say that kind of stuff often, and to me, half the time it doesn't really matter. I mean, you're getting the same old fighter, but in Swanson's case, I think that that's actually true. He's improved that much that he can seriously be a contender at 145. And if he wins this fight over Edgar, he's going to be right there in that, getting that title shot for sure. So this is an interesting fight. I mean, with Cub Swanson's power, with his speed, his accuracy is very good as well. Interesting matchup. I think that Edgar, you got to give him the slight edge in this fight because he can control the tempo of the fight. I think he could mix in some takedowns. I think if he doesn't get clipped and knocked out, he's probably going to win this fight, and more than likely on the scorecards. But my hesitation is because Swanson is such a powerful striker, and he's fairly accurate while doing so. I mean, he could definitely do some damage. Edgar has been rocked before. He's never been officially knocked out, but we know how tough he is. But he has been rocked in several fights throughout his career as well. So with a fighter like Swanson and with Edgar getting up there in age a little bit, I mean, he's not old, but 33 years old, and some of the wars that he's had, I'm almost again expecting that point where eventually Frankie's going to kind of decline and he's going to get knocked out cleanly. So this could possibly be the fight. That's my concern. So I don't really think it's a good idea laying 2-1 or over on this kind of fight. I think Swanson's a very dangerous opponent, so it's pretty much a dog or pass situation here. But at the same time, I'm not sure if Swanson's ready to beat somebody like Edgar, because Edgar is such a complete fighter. He can't get the takedowns. He can't control the action. So if Swanson doesn't knock him out, he's probably going to lose. So my official pick is going to be Edgar. He's the man, and until I think he gets kind of dethroned, minus the title, of course, in this spot, he's going to stay the man. So in my opinion, I can't pick against him. So I got to go Frankie Edgar. But as far as betting goes, be careful if you guys are betting on Edgar, because I think Swanson could possibly be a live dog.
Yeah, and you got to give huge credit to Cub Swanson, because this is not the same fighter that lost 3 out of 5 bouts over the course of from June 2009 to November 2011. He has completely turned it all around. He looks incredible inside the octagon, and it's not like he's been going in there against complete slouches either. I mean, you look at the people that Cub Swanson has defeated during this run, and it's Ross Pearson, Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, Dennis Seaver, Jeremy Stevens. All 5 of those guys would be, or at one point were in the top 15 in the featherweight division. I mean, that is incredibly impressive. The guy has serious knockout power, and he has high accuracy, and he has really good scrambles on the ground as well. So he's just a huge problem to deal with in the featherweight division. Unfortunately, I do think that Frankie Edgar does have the answers to that problem, pun intended. Edgar just has incredibly good footwork. He moves around the cage very well. He gets in, he gets out, and he's able to pop off combinations. And he's been slowly adding a little bit more power to his combinations. He's been mixing it up a little bit more each year that he's evolved his overall game. And he's done a really good job now, especially of implementing some wrestling when he needs to. And I think in this fight, if the stand-up isn't going well, Frankie Edgar can definitely fall back on that wrestling, because Cub Swanson, while he does have a good scrambling game, he does not have amazing wrestling. He has had some problems in the past against some good wrestlers. Ricardo Lamas was able to get that late submission against him. Chad Mendes was able to grind him out. Mackin Seminger had a crazy good fight against him using some solid wrestling. And even Dustin Poirier, who isn't the best wrestler, was able to force a very competitive fight with a lot of fun grappling exchanges. And I do think Frankie Edgar is a spectacular wrestler. His top control is excellent. His shots are perfectly timed, probably only second to Demetrius Johnson, in my opinion. And that's how he's able to get in and take people down that, surprise you. So Frankie Edgar does a lot of things really, really well. And as you saw in that last fight against BJ Penn, he still has plenty left in the tank. He looked as good as ever against Penn. It just sucks that he had to be out so long because of the filming of that Ultimate Fighter season. But obviously the one thing that is scary with Edgar is the chin. Now, I'm not saying he has a bad chin, because he's never officially been knocked out, but he does get hurt. He has been rocked in several fights. He has been dropped in several fights. He's been in really bad situations in multiple fights, but he always does have that incredible heart and comeback mentality. And against Cub Swanson, if he gets hit with something really hard, Cub's not going to let him go. Cub has a really good finishing instinct, like against Dennis Seaver. When he had him hurt, he just poured it on and would not stop until that fight was over. So, Cub is definitely not somebody that Edgar can take lightly at all. So, it's going to be very, very scary at all moments. All 5 rounds, Cub is going to have the threat of the knockout at all points. So Edgar's going to have to be on guard at all times. And he still has to keep that pressure and constant movement up. But that should be to his advantage. Cub did show in his last fight that he can go 5 rounds and not run out of steam. So Edgar shouldn't have too much of a cardio advantage. But overall, skill for skill, I do think Frankie Edgar is the better fighter. You just gotta watch out for that insane knockout power of Swanson. So my pick is gonna be Edgar, but I am a little scared heading into this one. So Reed, what do the numbers tell us?
Well, you've mentioned all the big points here. Frankie Edgar, first of all, if this fight goes to a decision, he is going to be one of the biggest veterans that the UFC has ever seen. He'll actually move into third place, along with George St. Pierre and BJ Penn. He'll surpass Tito Ortiz as just logging the most minutes in the cage of any fighter in UFC history. So he has been around a long time, and we've been able to see how his game has changed in the years that he's been in. So for those interested, check out the MMA Oddsbreaker website, see the article on the statistical evolution of Frankie Edgar. It's interesting that he was very, very reliant on his wrestling early on. Then he got away from that, and you could arguably say he was using takedowns more as a tactical feint to open up his boxing. And he's very good in and out. You know, he throws a combination and he flits out of range. But he has been caught, and he's been dropped 4 times now, and that is a big liability for him. Especially because Cub Swanson has shown that finishing instinct. He has very high accuracy as a striker, much higher than Frankie Edgar, despite the 2-inch range differential. And so that is a liability. That's, I think, what everybody's recognizing is that Edgar is extremely well-rounded. He's got the wrestling to fall back on, but he can get himself into trouble when he stands and trades. So Swanson is probably going to have the slightly better defense. He's going to have the better chin, and he's going to have good accuracy. His cage control isn't quite as good as Frankie Edgar, but that's basically a wash. Swanson operates at a slightly higher pace, so he gets a slight edge there. So when you look at this, the stand-up matchup slightly favors Swanson. It's just that on the mat, Edgar's ground control, his ability to just land takedowns and score those points can add up and help him win rounds. Swanson actually has used submissions more frequently, so that's an interesting thing, but I don't think Edgar is going to get submitted here. If this goes the distance, it's going to be close, as Frankie Edgar is used to doing, these close decisions. But given who he has grinded out before, been in the cage with much larger fighters, he probably gets the edge here if this goes to the cards. That's if it gets to the cards. So Swanson, he's going to be headhunting. He's going to be looking for that TKO upset, and there's a reasonable probability of that occurring. So, be very careful with which odds you're chasing on this one, because, there are some specific scenarios where I think this fight is going to go with them. And I'm going to be watching. It's going to be a good one.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 57. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday afternoon following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member. Now, if we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.